At 3 a.m., a pickup truck rolls toward a dusty border road, headlights off, engine barely breathing, because in Burkina Faso, a few kilograms of gold can be worth more than a lifetime of wages, and smugglers don't need an army when they have silence. Gold slips out of the country the same way water leaks from a cracked pot, not in one big dramatic flood, but drop by drop, day after day, until everyone wonders why the nation is still poor. And here's the part that shocks people. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers, yet ordinary citizens often see little change. So what happens when a young military leader, Ibrahim Traoré, decides that the leak has to stop and that the state will fight back? Not with speeches, but with control. Before we talk about what Traoré is doing, you need to understand why gold smuggling is not just theft. It's a parallel economy with its own routes, middlemen, bribes, and coded phone calls. Smuggling thrives where mining is informal, where paperwork is weak, and where borders are long and hard to patrol, conditions that exist across the Sahel. A miner digs all day, sells to a trader at night, and the gold can cross into a neighboring country before sunrise, relabeled, resold, and cleaned into the legal global market. If you're wondering, why would anyone allow that? Stay with me, because the answer is exactly why Traoré's crackdown is so politically explosive. In Burkina Faso, a big portion of gold comes from artisanal and small-scale mining. Thousands of people working at informal sites with simple tools, dangerous pits, and cash-only transactions. Artisanal gold is hard to trace, and that's the point. When there's no official weighing station, no licensed buyer, and no transparent receipt system, gold becomes invisible. Invisible gold doesn't pay taxes. Invisible gold doesn't fund hospitals. Invisible gold doesn't strengthen the currency. And invisible gold can fund the very armed groups and criminal networks that make the country unstable, because in conflict zones, anything valuable becomes fuel. Now add geography. Burkina Faso is landlocked, with multiple borders and heavy trade flows that can hide contraband in plain sight. Borders aren't just lines on a map. They're living marketplaces. People moving to visit family, to sell goods, to find work, to survive. Smugglers use the same roads as ordinary traders, and they rely on speed, local knowledge, and sometimes corruption. Gold might be hidden in vehicle panels, mixed with other metals, carried by couriers, or moved in tiny quantities repeatedly, so no single seizure looks big. That's why a crackdown isn't only about arresting a few people, it's about changing the system that makes smuggling easy and low risk. This is where Ibrahim Traoré's approach, at least as described by government messaging and regional reporting, signals a shift. He frames gold as a sovereignty issue, not just a revenue issue. Since taking power in 2022, Traoré has presented himself as someone trying to rebuild state authority, especially in areas where insecurity and informal economies dominate. In that worldview, smuggled gold is not merely lost money, it's lost control over territory, over trade, over who gets paid, and over who gets armed. And when you see it that way, you also see why the state would prioritize measures that tighten oversight of production, buying, transport, and export, not just policing at the border. One major lever is reforming how gold is bought inside the country, because if smugglers are the easiest buyers, miners will sell to smugglers. Incentives matter more than slogans. A serious anti-smuggling strategy often tries to pull artisanal miners into formal channels by licensing buyers, setting up official purchasing points, standardizing scales, and making payments safer and more reliable. If a miner can sell legally without losing time, without being cheated on weight, and without facing harassment, the legal market becomes competitive. When legal buying becomes convenient, smugglers lose their biggest advantage, being the fastest cash in the dark. Another lever is the state increasing its footprint in the mining sector through stronger institutions and participation structures, something Burkina Faso has moved toward in recent years, with steps reported around greater state involvement and oversight. Control here doesn't always mean nationalize everything tomorrow. It can mean the state expands its ability to monitor flows, enforce licensing, audit production, and claim royalties. When the government positions itself closer to the point where gold becomes money at the buying desk, at the transport checkpoint, at the export permit office, it becomes harder for gold to simply vanish. And Traoré's political message is clear. If the country is producing wealth, the country should capture more of it. But let's talk about the part viewers usually want. The crackdown itself, the raids, the seizures, the arrests. Enforcement is the most visible tool, and it sends a psychological signal. The old free-for-all is over. Reports from the region frequently describe Sahel governments intensifying operations against illegal mining sites, unlicensed traders, and suspicious transport, sometimes linking these actions to security campaigns. When checkpoints become unpredictable and documentation is demanded more often, smuggling costs rise. And smuggling is like any business. If the costs and risks rise high enough, the profit disappears or the network breaks into smaller parts that are easier to disrupt. Here's the tension though. If enforcement is the only tool, it can backfire. Pressure can push artisanal miners deeper into the shadows if they feel targeted rather than included. And it can also create new opportunities for bribery if oversight is weak. That's why the most effective anti-smuggling strategy combines the stick with the carrot formalization, legal access to markets, safety standards, and clear rules. If Traoré's government can build a system where miners see benefits, better prices, stable buying, fewer predatory middlemen, then enforcement becomes the final layer, not the entire plan. The real battle is not at the border, it's at the first sale. There's also a paper trail war happening, because modern smuggling isn't only about hiding metal, it's about laundering origin through documents. Traceability is the nightmare of smugglers. When governments and partners introduce tighter export permits, standardized reporting from mines, and cross-checks between production estimates and declared exports, smuggling becomes easier to detect, even if no one catches a truck. If a region produces X kilograms, but only Y kilograms appear in official channels, the gap becomes a target. And once authorities focus on the gap, they can identify which routes, buyers, or sites consistently sit in the shadows. One idea that keeps coming up across gold-producing countries is local value addition refining, accredited assaying, and structured sales, because exporting raw, semi-traced gold makes leakage easier. Refining inside the country can tighten control, since gold passes through fewer opaque hands and more standardized processes. It's not a magic fix. Refineries need credibility, security, financing, and international compliance. But the logic is straightforward. The more steps you keep within regulated institutions, the fewer places gold can disappear. If Traoré pushes policies that keep more gold in monitored channels before export, it can reduce smuggling incentives while also increasing captured revenue. Now, zoom out. Why is Traoré taking this so personally, so publicly? Because for a leader trying to build legitimacy, nothing is more powerful than saying, I recovered what was stolen. Legitimacy in fragile states often comes from visible wins. Improved security, cheaper basic goods, functioning services, and money from gold can fund all of that. So stopping smuggling becomes a political story. The government versus the shadow networks. It's also a geopolitical story because gold is global, and every ounce that crosses a border can connect to international traders, regional hubs, and financial flows that are difficult to police. But the hardest part isn't catching smugglers. It's keeping the system clean when money is everywhere. Corruption is the silent partner of smuggling, because one compromised checkpoint or one forged stamp can undo an entire enforcement operation. That's why any serious plan needs internal discipline. Rotating officers, auditing licensing offices, punishing officials who facilitate illegal trade, and using transparent digital records where possible. If Traoré's administration wants this to last, it has to prove that the crackdown is not selective, because selective enforcement just rearranges who controls the smuggling instead of stopping it. There's also the security dimension that cannot be ignored. Some illegal mining zones overlap with areas affected by insurgent activity, and the state may treat these zones as strategic. Security operations can disrupt illicit trade, but they can also displace communities if handled roughly, creating resentment that smugglers and armed groups can exploit. The challenge is balancing urgency with fairness, protecting civilians, keeping miners from being exploited, and ensuring that the formal economy offers real alternatives. If people feel the legal system is simply another gatekeeper that blocks survival, they will return to the black market no matter how many raids happen. So, what would success actually look like? It won't be one dramatic announcement, it will be gradual. More gold sold through official channels, higher recorded exports that match production estimates, increased tax and royalty collection, and fewer ghost flows across borders. Results would show up in data and in daily life, better funded local S. Better funded local services, more stable mining communities, and reduced funding streams for criminal networks. And if Traoré can couple enforcement with reforms that make legal trade genuinely attractive, he can turn gold from a curse fueling, smuggling, and conflict into a lever for rebuilding the state. Here's the final question that decides everything. Can Burkina Faso build institutions faster than smugglers can adapt? Because smugglers always adapt new routes, smaller shipments, different middlemen, different paperwork. Momentum is what the government needs. Consistent rules, predictable legal markets, credible penalties, and enough transparency that citizens believe the money is going somewhere real. If Traoré's campaign becomes a permanent system rather than a temporary crackdown, it could reshape Burkina Faso's gold economy. And if it doesn't, the trucks will keep rolling at 3 a.m. Quiet, invisible, and richer than the nation they're draining.